Welcome back, everybody, to Constructive Uncoupling, the podcast devoted to amicable divorces. I'm Judy Weigel, your amicable divorce expert. Why? Because that's all I do, amicable divorces. Today we have Lorna Mouton Riff. Lorna is amazing. She is not only really smart, but she is really, really empathetic. Lorna is a forensic accountant. The stories Lorna has about unusual divorce settlements are actually helpful life lessons to anyone because they combine the intricacies of financial evaluations and settlements with the emotional trauma that accompanies high net worth settlements. Lorna has been doing her work as a forensic accountant for 35 years. She is currently with a firm called CBIZ on the west side of Los Angeles. She is the director of forensic and financial services. But she does so much more than her job, which is all-consuming. Anyway, Lorna is an expert witness in family law cases. She's on the board of a nonprofit called Levitt & Quinn, and Levitt & Quinn provides legal services to those most vulnerable entering the divorce environment. Lorna is also a presenter and an integral part of a group called Second Saturday Divorce Workshops. She'll tell you a little bit about that, perhaps. She's also an invited speaker by family law firms, family lawyers, and study groups on forensic accounting. She also is now a mentor to an or some upcoming young forensics, right?
Some.
Okay. Well, they will grow, they will grow, they will grow. Lorna is just one of the most amazing people I have ever met. And although she works with high net worth clients, she also will take pieces of work and do them for regular network people like us. So, Lorna, welcome.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
I really appreciate the time you've taken because I think everybody's going to learn a whole lot today with your information. So, Lorna, when people use forensic accountants, can it still be amicable? Or do you only walk into very stressful situations?
Well, I think the stress is always there. The level depends. But my role is multitasked in that I can walk into a very highly contentious situation. I can be retained by one party, or I can be retained by both parties. Either in a litigious situation or a mediation type situation. And sometimes I'm even retained by the family law judges in order to assist them in resolving possibly that two accountants have already come up with their analyses and they're so far apart that they need a third opinion in order to come up with some medium scope on a case. So the hats that I wear are of a multitude.
So let's start with the first hat. What is a forensic accountant?
Okay, so I do not do accounting for dead bodies, as I am often asked.
What are you talking about?
People, for some reason, associate the word forensics with death because they have watched too many television shows.
I get it.
Okay.
I get it.
So, in actuality, the word forensic in its simplistic form means to prepare something to present before a court of law. So, if you apply that to accounting, that is effectively what a forensic accountant does, is we prepare accounting information to present before the court, and that's our ultimate goal, but it's also used in a legal situation.
Look, Lorna, do most of your cases go to court that you're working on?
Actually,
are they of that magnitude?
No.
Okay.
No.
Well, they're of big magnitude, but they don't.
Most of the cases actually settle.
Okay.
Very few of my cases, anyway, end up in court, although most people are thinking of court as being a trial. There might be a hearing or two leading up to a settlement. So I might actually appear at a hearing, which is simply to establish, initial support before the case gets developed and people actually figure out, what everything is.
Initial child and or spousal support, right?
Correct.
When you say support.
Correct.
Okay, very good.
Correct.
So what does it cost to employ a forensic accountant? Something that a lot of people would never do and many people have to.
Yes. So most forensic accountants, at least in Los Angeles or in California, we bill hourly. And depending on the size of the firm that you're hiring or the individual, because there are some sole practitioners, the rates range. So a director, as in my position, or a partner with a firm could be billing at anywhere between $350 and $500 an hour. There might be a few that are higher than that. And then we have staff. So we have accounting staff that we assign the tasks to, and the work kind of goes up the ladder. So those rates among the staff vary, and we use that as a methodology to control the fees, so that we have our, say, least experienced staff person, heavily supervised, do the most amount of, say, database building, so that becomes very cost effective, and then it works, the project will move its way up.
So this is a little bit like when you hire a law firm. You have your attorney, but then you have staff that can do some of the clerical management, other types of things, so the cost can be somewhat managed.
Exactly.
But it's still a heavy duty.
It gets expensive quick. It gets expensive quick, and the fees can range. Sadly, I tell people jokingly, but not jokingly, I couldn't afford myself, because it's not unusual for a case to come in, a very simple case, maybe a house, maybe a small business, some different kinds of assets, maybe an interesting income structure, to have fees that are in the $20,000 to $30,000 range.
Well, legal fees can be more than that, so
yes,
it's got to be important, which is my next question. When is a forensic accountant or forensic services necessary?
They become necessary when the lawyer needs something more than just looking at bank statements or escrow documents or loan statements to figure out what assets and debts are, or an income structure. If there are tracing issues, say somebody came into the relationship with separate property, and that becomes a big issue in a case and they need assistance with that, or there's a complex employment structure with maybe there's a base salary and a bonus, but then there's also employee stock benefits. So that's typically when it's necessary to bring us in to assist with that analysis.
You did mention that you could work on part of a settlement or the entire settlement for dividing assets and debts. And I actually referred you to a couple pieces of business where there was only a family business involved to divide.
Yes.
Let's talk about that, because in Southern California, as in most places now, there are family businesses that have supported the family. So is a family business community property in a community property state like California?
It depends. And it depends on when the business was started and the life of the business. So, for example, if the business was started during marriage, for the most part, that's probably a community asset, but there could be other reasons that maybe there was an infusion of other monies. So there's other factors that have to be weighed. So the actual answer to your question is it's not a straight yes or a straight no. It always depends. We need more information in order to determine that.
Okay, so here's a typical conversation that comes in my office, and it will eventually land in yours. People come in, they're amicable. They feel that they, on their own, can divide everything per their comfort level. Great. Except for the family business. That's the one exception that the person who's running the family business says, well, this is the source of income. This is how I'm going to pay you spousal support and or child support. How am I going to do that if we divide it? So the picture in my head has always been very visual. How is this business split in half? But that's not exactly what happens. The person who owns the business, if it's only one person in the family who has their name, they don't actually have to give up half the business, right? Say how it's looked at as an asset. You did this with me one day, and it was brilliant the way you explained it.
So I always look at businesses as having two parts. So one part of a business is, helpfully, an income stream, assuming that it's profitable. The second part of the business is the asset itself. So if you can visualize a business not unlike a stock portfolio. In a stock portfolio, you have the assets, which are the stocks that you hold in that account. So that's an asset to be valued and possibly divided or assigned to one or the other of the parties. The other component is that asset, the business or the stock portfolio, has an income stream. And that is a separate thing that we look at as well. So we're going to look to the value of the asset in dividing the property. And more often than not, what happens is we're going to value the business, and then typically the one or the other of the spouses will pay half of that value to the other spouse as part of a property settlement.
And it's a one-time payment, Lorna?
Well, it's a one-time payment.
Well,
that
it's a one number obligation. How it gets paid maybe over time, who knows, right?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. So that's the aspect of the business being valued, and then the value, the monetary value being assigned as part of the property division. Then the other component to that is, on an ongoing basis, assuming the business survives this, the income stream going forward from that business is available to consider for spousal or child support. So that's what I said, a business has two components to it that need to be looked at. And so in a contentious situation, we would do a valuation, and there might be some disagreement, and the court may end up deciding that. In a settlement situation, often what happens is we will do the valuation, and then the couple will have a discussion. And often the discussion comes in that, depending on that number of the value as compared to the other assets in their marital estate that are going to be divided up, they may choose to make a decision about those values that works better for them and that doesn't obligate them for too long of a time period. I mean, I've seen people make all kinds of decisions about how that gets paid out, and adjusting the amount, maybe trading the value in some portion for a higher support amount up front. I mean, there's a lot of variables, as you know, when you're helping people settle something, because the idea is you're offering them an opportunity to have control over their financial future and what they want that to look like and what that will work for them. So this is where a business can possibly offer other opportunities in settlement.
Okay, so now we're going to take a fascinating example that happens with a lot of people, and it's a business that takes in cash. And we know what happens to that cash sometimes.
Yes.
What do you do when you're given this project, this client, and you get the books or whatever you get to look at to see the value of the business as it's defined by the owner of the business, and then you get the other spouse saying, not true, I know it makes more money, I've worked there. What do you do?
So we have in our little forensic world, and this is the kind of the fun part for me where I get to play a little bit of Sherlock Holmes. We have techniques that we can use and things that we can look at to help us determine whether or not that is a likelihood, because it is more common that we hear that, even in instances where there is no cash. Someone has seen cash, but it turns out it just came from ATM withdrawals, which are on a bank statement. That's different from what you've just described. So in a business, though, that is a cash business, usually there's something that's generating that business income. So it's either goods, so we can measure goods coming in and out. A great example is hair salon. You can look at how many towels are laundered, how many towels are available in the shop at any given time. We look at calendars. We look at
calendars of appointments.
Of appointments, and we see what's on the calendar. If it's there's, as I said, there's different techniques that we might use for different types of businesses. And the most common one is usually a product they're purchasing and then they're turning around and selling at a profit. Although oftentimes what happens is in some industries, more common than others, the cycle of cash is a total cycle in that they are paying cash for the cost of the goods and then getting cash when they sell it. So a great example is the garment business.
Oh.
Okay. So oftentimes there's a above board culture of, merchant fabric is purchased, the work is paid for, with checks, and that's all the above board part. But there might also be an underground part to that, which is that some sales are made to, say, when you offload merchandise that you can't sell in the stores anymore. So you're selling them, for 10 or 15, if you're lucky, 50 cents on the dollar, and you get cash for that. And maybe you use that cash to buy more fabric, or you might pay some vendors with cash. So it just depends. It depends on the industry. I always listen. I listen to what a client has to say about that and their concerns, and I try to address it as best we can. It's a difficult area, and I tell people, unless we can match it up with something, and it's not perfect, it's an expensive process to go on a hunt. And I've had people say to me, well, I know he's got bank accounts, all over the place. And I said, well, unless you hire a private detective.
Or an asset researcher, right? Isn't that the term used?
Well, that maybe, you could possibly turn up some things that way too.
You don't have asset researchers
we don't do
with
that.
you, do you?
No,
Okay.
we don't do that. But, oftentimes people will hire a private detective.
Really?
To follow, well, because people want to be close to their money. So they might go to visit the bank where they're keeping some money and go make a deposit or go make a withdrawal. So people have been followed in the past. If there was a clear evidence, a little more evidence that there actually was other banking activity going on, that's been done. So there's a lot of things that can be done. But of course, I'm assuming everyone is hearing all these things cost money to do this investigation. So there has to be a cost benefit.
Exactly.
There has to be a cost benefit. So I typically will ask, my client, well, okay, so you think they're squirreling away money. How much money do you think it is? Do you think it's something that is, tens of thousands of dollars, hundreds of thousands of dollars? What are we talking about here?
Right.
And then we start talking about the cost to do that. So then we approach, is there cost benefit to do it? Or is it simply like something that maybe we could just bring up and say, look, we know this is going on, and maybe we can negotiate a way to resolve that. Sometimes that goes over well, sometimes not so much.
Just as a little side part of this, with family businesses, and I want to move on to something else, but with family businesses, if they're small and not a partnership, easily personal expenses can be paid by the business, which is not correct. We're supposed to pay ourselves a salary, put that in our personal bank accounts, and pay our personal expenses out of our personal bank accounts, right?
Correct.
So now you have a situation where it is brought up that, or you could see for yourself maybe, that personal expenses have been paid by the business. It affects the division of the business. It affects the amount of money available for child and spousal support. And there are tax returns that have to be looked at. How do you talk to people when you see a business hasn't been exactly run correctly? Are you bound to use the documentation, like from the IRS, in order to do some of your work from the business with child and spousal support?
So my approach and the way I talk to clients about this, because it's often a sensitive subject. So my approach is the way that you maintain your books and records for your business and file your tax returns may in fact be appropriate for doing that. But in family law, we might look at some of those expenses in a different way. And we might consider them as being of a personal nature that are very discretionary. And so we are likely going to be making some adjustments for some items that you're currently paying from your business, and we call those perquisites. So I try to approach this very delicately.
That was really nice
with
the
my
way
own
you said that.
with my own clients, because I'm not trying to make somebody feel wrong. For me, it's not about it's not about you've been doing this wrong. This is how we are going to do this for family law, and this is how it's treated. And so then we have a discussion, go through different items and talk about it and see how does that weigh in? Is it really a business expense? And maybe actually, for family law, the court's probably going to perceive it as being of a personal nature.
And so would the court or would a forensic accounting firm kind of back out some of those subjective personal expenses to look at what the real bottom line of the business would be, what it's generating, or net profit?
Yes, that's exactly what we do.
Okay.
We make an adjustment for anything personal in nature, perquisites, and that will apply to the value, and it will apply to the income stream.
Okay. Lorna, what is fascinating to me when I got to know you and listened to the stories in our special interest group, that's how we have shared stories, and it's very confidential, of course, and no names are named. It's just stories without names. When one says the phrase forensic accountant and even says the word accountant, it's a very black and white, cut and dry kind of concept to most people. But your stories are not cut and dry. They are not black and white. They are emotion-filled, and they are heavily dealing with finances. So my question going forward to you is, what are some of the most fearful aspects of the financial part, sorting out of a divorce?
I think the number one thing is, because as you mentioned when we first started talking, that yes, many of my clients are high net worth people. However, I do have a lot of clients that while they may have good incomes and they have a very nice lifestyle, in a divorce, the hardest thing for a couple to handle individually is the fact that in many instances, once the division of property takes place and people have set up their own homes, that pool of money that supported a single household is now going to be divided and is going to be used to now support two households. And sometimes there's enough to go around, but oftentimes there is not enough to go around without making significant changes in one's life. And that fear is, I think, the most emotional aspect that I've had to deal with. And particularly, I think this affects, sadly, mostly women. Women who've been in a marriage for a long time, who maybe haven't had to work outside of the home. And the fear, the level of fear is gut-wrenching oftentimes. And they require an enormous amount of hand-holding to help them figure out how to reconstruct a life that's going to be probably in a smaller home, maybe even an apartment or a condo if they're lucky, and the possibility in midlife or later having to go start some kind of career or find work, or even in many instances figure out what it is they could even do. What are they qualified to do? And that fear translates in my world with, often crying, but oftentimes I get hit with anger from my clients. They'll get angry because I'm the messenger. I am the messenger of this bad news. And so I just try to be as sensitive as I can, because I recognize that the financial issues in a divorce are the most emotional. because they dive into that core of us, our security, and without the knowledge of not feeling like, where am I going to live? How am I going to make ends meet? What kind of place could I even have? And for many, I have a few clients right now, they're paralyzed by this knowledge or fear of not knowing, And so that's a part that I try to help people through. And it's not exclusive to women, although it is primarily the female clients I have had. As we move forward, we have more and more of the husbands
switching roles,
where the roles have been switched. And so I try to, to me, it's becoming a gender neutral. It has no gender. It could be anybody. It could be anybody. So that I think is the biggest issue. I also think one of the other ones is this concept, this emotional concept of making somebody pay for doing something that they feel where they were wronged. So, for example, if there was an act of infidelity committed by the other person, there's this emotional, there's an anger and there's this desire to feel that they should get more, that they should be compensated in some way for this emotional trauma. And that's not going to happen because that's not how it works here in California.
It's a no-fault divorce state, and you don't check any boxes for infidelity.
Correct.
Or drug abuse or anything like that.
Correct. I think the only time there is some consideration is if there's
children.
If there's domestic violence, there may be some consideration. But otherwise, things are, for the most part, going to be divided equally. So those, I think, are the two big areas. And also, I think, the third one, which oddly invades my world occasionally, is if one or the other of the parties has already started a new relationship in the midst of the divorce. And it's even more complicated if they have children. And I often will get asked to go on a hunt for expenses where they're paying for things for this new person. And then, of course, the suspicion might open up that, oh my gosh, well, this relationship started so soon, maybe they were already seeing them. So then I'm asked to go down the rabbit hole of, well, I want you to go back and check and see, were they paying for things while we were married?
Is that something that is part of your role?
It could be.
Really?
It could be.
Okay.
It could be because in the past, I have had some cases where the amount of money, and of course we're talking about people of greater means, where the amount of money that was spent was tremendous. And so therefore I was asked to account for those monies and seek and ask for a reimbursement.
Because, Lorna, that would be money spent adverse to the health and welfare of the community, meaning adverse to the life of the couple who's actually married, correct?
That's a good way to put it. That's a good way to put it. Yes. So that I have had to do that on a few occasions.
It's all tough. It's wonderful to have money. You can't live without it, typically, unless you go under the grid. You can't live without it, but the more you have, the more difficult it is to unravel when you get to the point of uncoupling and divorcing, right?
It can be. Interestingly enough, oftentimes, for the very wealthy, the division of the property in the divorce is actually more like creating a legacy plan. It's really about the children and how the money is, the assurance that the money and the family wealth is going to pass to the children of that marriage. And that's often what happens. And that's actually simpler, because the vision is, if either one of you happens to remarry, we don't want the new spouse getting the bulk of this wealth. And if you have more children, we want these children to get this wealth. So then we bring in estate planners if they don't already have them, and we make sure that it's really about that plan. And those are usually the easiest.
It's funny you should say that, because the largest settlement that came to this office, to my knowledge, was a $25 million settlement last year. They didn't even mediate. They handed me the settlement and they split everything right down the middle. Of course, there was no spousal support, by the way, as part of this, because there was $12.5 million was enough for the wife to get. But they were just so easy to work with. And yes, I saw in the terms of the settlement they gave me to write up how the children were dealt with assets and trusts and future planning. And it was just very neat and interesting. And I did wonder with that, I said, I guess as long as the person controlling the wealth is of the mind that, okay, we'll just divide it and move on, then everything should be okay. Again, as long as the other person agrees that this is the number. I agree with this number. I will refer back to Fred Siegel of the Fred Siegel department store chain in Los Angeles.
Oh, yes.
Before my time with this company, the former owner did two, I believe she told me, two of his divorces. And the mantra was, give her whatever she wants, I can always make more money. Don't you love that?
That's
so cool.
Perfect.
So easy, so cool. So in conclusion, is there any advice you can give people who are about to get divorced? Any help for them to organize themselves and just to get their heads straight to approach the financial aspect of their divorce with the least stress possible? Any words of advice?
So I would say in this environment, in a mediation settlement-oriented, settlement-driven type of environment. So we're assuming that people are still able to have a somewhat civil conversation and reasonable conversation with each other. I would suggest that they put together their documents of all the things that they own, and with a copy of some type of a record of that. So, for example, for the bank accounts, that you have a current bank statement. For your home, that you pull together the file that maybe has the grant deed and your mortgage, and just start assembling the different financial information that you have into a single place. Now, start organizing that. The exchange of information is tremendous and very valuable, because one thing that has to be looked at that I think couples may not recognize is the dynamics of a marriage. Typically, one or the other party in a marriage is handling the primary role of taking care of the finances. It's not as often, not as common that I see where both people are equally involved in that. And if the person managing the money can understand that this has now become an exercise for them of releasing information and conveying information to the other person, that doing so will help reduce their fear of the unknown. And that once they start having the information, that I think that conversation can then move forward, because otherwise the control is still there. And until that information is shared, the other person is going to be fearful that they're not being given information, the truth, So that's a huge thing. I also highly suggest, I tell this to my clients all the time, the divorce process is painful. It's really, it's an emotional roller coaster. But it too shall end. And one morning you will wake up and you will have a life to look forward to. So I usually will tell my clients, I encourage them that as part of just a little piece of this process, that while they're going through separating everything, that they look to what they want their life to look like once the dust has settled. If they're not working, what do they want to do? Do they want to work? What might they need to do to get there? If they're not sure, I encourage people to think about something that brought them joy when they were a child or a teenager. And something like maybe, I've had clients, I'll give an example. I had one client who she hadn't worked in years, had no idea what she was going to do. She was terrified. And I asked her, I said, well, when you were growing up, what brought you joy? What made you smile? And she said, I used to paint. I used to do artwork. And I said, well, go take an art class. I said, if you're rusty, go take an art class. This is, I think now probably at least 15 or more years ago. She is an artist today. Wow. That is how she makes a living. Now, she did not see that coming. She looked to it as a way to find joy in her life again, but it opened a door for her. So, and I use that example because you don't know what's going to happen. Nobody does, but it helps to make a plan.
Lorna, when I send out confirmation emails for people to come in to initiate the divorce process by filing, the very last sentence in those emails is, divorce is a new beginning. I not only want to end that email positively, but it's a reality, and you said it so well. You will have a life. This will end. You will have a new life, and it can be whatever you want it to be. You don't have to, generally, unless you have small children, you don't have to consider another adult person in that choice of life. So, and philosophically, we get what we need to learn and grow. And it's a hard pill to swallow sometimes that maybe this thing called divorce can actually be beneficial somehow, some way. Yes. But I love what you said. And the thing I wanted to just share with all of you listening is, not only is Lorna an amazing human being, amazing at her work, 35 years, I hats off to her for this. But she's such a feeling person. She has so much compassion. And to put compassion and empathy in with her job of numbers, and I think that is just, you can't serve people better in a really stressful time like divorce. I thank you for being the human being you are. Mm-hmm. I thank you for coming in here and sharing. I hope you will come back and join us in the future. And if people want to get in touch with you, how would they do it?
The easiest way to reach me is by email, and that's L Mouton, Mouton, Riff, RIFF like Frank, at cbiz.com.
So that's L Mouton Riff MoutonRi, F as in Frank, F as in Frank, at cbiz.com. And thank you. I am Judy Weigel. You have just listened to Constructive Uncoupling, the podcast devoted to amicable divorces. You can reach me if you would like to add to any of the episodes you've heard or ask me to spend time on a topic important to you. Please email me at Judy, Judy, at constructiveuncoupling.com. Judy at constructiveuncoupling.com. We will talk to you next week. Thank you again for joining us.